The episode doesn't just show Agnes struggling, it carefully builds her internal rebellion through silence, and one of the most powerful things here is how she begins to observe rather than obey, because earlier in the season she followed instructions almost automatically. But in this episode you can see hesitation in her body language, the way she pauses before responding, the way she studies the women around her, and that shift is crucial because it shows that her belief system is starting to fracture from the inside rather than being shattered from the outside. There's also a very important detail in the way other wives interact with her, because instead of offering comfort, they reinforce fear, subtly reminding her that her worth is tied to obedience and status, and this social pressure becomes just as suffocating as the laws of Gilead itself, making Agnes feel trapped not just physically, but psychologically, which is why her near-breaking moment feels so real and earned. Dace's storyline goes even darker, when you really pay attention to the pacing of her scenes, because every interaction she has feels like a test, as if the people around her are constantly measuring whether she's ready to hear the truth, and there's this growing sense that she's being pulled into a role she never chose, which adds a layer of tragedy to her arc since her freedom outside Gilead is starting to look like an illusion. One of the most intense undercurrents in Dace's plot is trust, or rather the lack of it, because the more she learns, the less she knows who to believe, and that confusion is deliberate, as the episode places her in situations where every answer leads to more questions, building toward that moment where her identity reveal doesn't feel like relief. It feels like a burden that instantly puts her in danger. Aunt Lydia's scenes are even more layered than they first appear, because while she presents herself as a loyal architect of Gilead's system, her dialogue is filled with double meanings, and if you listen closely, you can tell she's constantly testing the boundaries of what she can say and do without raising suspicion, and this makes her incredibly dangerous because she's not just reacting to events, she's quietly shaping them. There's a subtle but important moment, where Lydia observes rather than intervenes, and that hesitation suggests she's allowing certain events to unfold intentionally, almost as if she's gathering leverage, which supports the idea that her long-term plan is already in motion and that she's willing to sacrifice individuals to achieve. The parallel storytelling between Agnes and Daisy becomes even more powerful in this episode because it's not just about their situations, it's about identity formation, as Agnes is being forced into an identity she doesn't fully accept, while Daisy is discovering an identity she never knew she had. And both journeys are painful in different ways, which creates a mirror effect that drives the emotional weight of the episode. Another layer that stands out is the theme of control versus choice, because every major character is dealing with some form of limitation. Agnes is controlled by Gilead's expectations, Daisy is controlled by hidden truths, and Lydia appears to be controlled by the system but is actually manipulating it, and this contrast is what makes the episode feel so tense, because you're constantly questioning who truly has power. By the time we reach the final scenes, Agnes' emotional state has shifted from quiet confusion to something closer to suppressed panic, and the way the episode frames her final moments suggests that she's on the verge of either complete submission or the beginning of rebellion. And that uncertainty is what makes her storyline so gripping. Moving forward, Daisy, on the other hand, ends the episode in a much more immediate state of danger, because now that the truth about her is beginning to surface, she's no longer just an observer, she's a target, and that shift dramatically raises the stakes for the next episode, as her survival may depend on how quickly she adapts to this new reality. And hovering over all of this is Aunt Lydia, who ends the episode in a position of quiet control. And while nothing she does feels explosive on the surface, there's a strong sense that she has just set something irreversible in motion, something that will likely bring all these storylines crashing together very soon. One of the most overlooked elements in this episode is how silence is used as power, especially in Agnes' scenes, because the absence of dialogue becomes more meaningful than words, and you'll notice that in key moments, she doesn't argue or resist out loud, but instead withdraws, and that withdrawal is actually the first stage of rebellion in Gilead. Since open defiance is dangerous, but internal rejection is where change begins, and the way the camera lingers on her reactions tells you that she's no longer fully accepting the world around her. There's also a subtle shift in how authority figures speak to Agnes, because their tone becomes more corrective and less nurturing, which suggests they sense something is changing in her, and in Gilead even the smallest deviation is treated as a threat, so the increased pressure on her isn't random, it's a response to her growing independence, even if she hasn't fully acted on it. Another key detail is how fear is normalized in her environment, because the other girls and wives don't just obey, they reinforce the system by repeating its beliefs, and this creates a psychological cage, where Agnes is not only controlled by rules but by the expectations of everyone around her, making her isolation even more intense, and this is why her eventual breaking point feels inevitable rather than sudden. Dace's storyline carries a completely different kind of tension, and it's built on information imbalance, because everyone around her seems to know more than she does. And the episode carefully structures her scenes so that each conversation reveals just enough to pull her deeper in without giving her clarity, and this creates a constant sense of unease, as if she's always one step behind the truth. There's a particularly important emotional beat, where Daisy realizes that her past may have been constructed or hidden from her, and that moment isn't just shocking, it's destabilizing, because identity is the one thing she thought she owned, and now even that is uncertain, which forces her to question every relationship and every memory she has. Aunt Lydia's role in this episode becomes even more fascinating when you look at her through the lens of long-term strategy, because she doesn't act impulsively at all. Every move she makes is controlled, measured, and layered with intent, and even when she appears to be enforcing Gilead's rules, there's a sense that she's gathering information, positioning people, and quietly influencing outcomes behind the scenes. There's also a strong implication that Lydia understands more about Agnes and Daisy than either of them realize, and this creates a looming tension because it suggests their stories are not just coincidentally parallel, they may be deliberately connected through Lydia's actions, which would make her the central architect of whatever is about to unfold. The episode also uses mirroring in a very deliberate way, as Agnes is being pushed deeper into Gilead's structure, while Daisy is being pulled closer to it from the outside, and this creates a narrative convergence that feels inevitable, as if both characters are moving toward the same collision point from opposite directions. And that structure is what gives the episode its underlying sense of momentum. Another layer worth noting is the theme of performance, because nearly every character is pretending to be something they're not. Agnes pretends to accept her role, Daisy pretends to understand what's happening, and Lydia pretends to be fully loyal. And this constant performance creates tension because you're always aware that the truth is being hidden just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to break through. As the episode builds toward its ending, the emotional weight shifts from confusion to inevitability, and you can feel that something irreversible has begun, especially in Agnes' storyline, where her internal resistance has reached a point where it can no longer stay hidden forever, and in Dace's case, where the truth has moved too close to the surface to be contained.